Imagine a world where night is not just darkness, but a living presence. A world where a single candle decides how much of your room you can see, and the rest belongs to shadows. This was the medieval world, a place shaped not by electricity, convenience, or modern comfort, but by fire, patience, and human resilience. To step into a medieval home is to step into a life built around survival, tradition, and the slow rhythm of nature. Everything was different, not better, not worse, but profoundly human. When the sun went down, the day ended for most people. Light was precious, expensive, and easily lost to a simple gust of wind. A medieval evening began with the crackling of the hearth, the soft sway of a tallow candle, and the deep stillness of a world resting beneath a sky without artificial light. People sat close to their fire because it wasn't just a tool, it was the center of life. The fire cooked their meals, warmed their bones, illuminated their surroundings, and kept away the dark that seemed to swallow everything outside the glow. Medieval homes were small, simple, and built from whatever material the land allowed. Peasants lived in structures made from mud, straw, timber, and packed earth. The floor was not polished stone or smooth wood. It was ground packed by years of footsteps, dust, and daily chores. The walls were thin, the wind found every gap, and when storms came, the house groaned like a living creature. Yet for the people inside, this humble space was a fortress against nature, a shelter for the family, animals, tools, and memories. The air often smelled of smoke, wool, damp earth, and stew that spent hours simmering in a pot above the flames. In wealthier homes and castles, stone replaced mud, large beams supported heavy roofs, and tapestries hung on walls to keep out the cold. But even in these grander places, warmth was a luxury. Each fireplace heated only one room, and anyone who dared walk down a corridor in winter felt as if the walls were made of ice. Servants slept near the kitchen for the simple reason that warmth existed there, while nobles piled blankets, furs, and thick wool upon their beds to survive the freezing nights. Light came from three basic sources: candles, oil lamps, and the fire itself. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, were cheap and common, but their thick smoke and heavy smell clung to everything. Beeswax candles burned cleaner, brighter, and steadier, reserved mostly for churches, nobility, and special occasions. Oil lamps flickered with a soft yellow flame and offered a gentler, more controlled light. In some homes, a single lamp would burn for hours while the family gathered nearby, talking in whispers, repairing clothes, carving wood, or simply listening to the quiet. Imagine reading a book or even telling a story with only one dim candle lighting your face. Shadows danced across the walls, making every movement seem alive. People grew up with a deep relationship to darkness. They respected it, feared it, and understood that night was not meant to be conquered but endured. The wild, the unknown, and the supernatural felt closer at night, and the boundary between reality and imagination blurred more easily than we can understand today. Because candles were expensive, people used them carefully. They snuffed them out early, measured their burn time, and planned their evenings around the fire. Work ended early, meals were eaten before sunset, and families spent long hours wrapped in blankets, listening to the crackle of burning wood. Night was not a time for productivity, it was for survival and rest. Sleep itself worked differently. People often followed a pattern called first sleep and second sleep. The first began shortly after sunset and lasted a few hours. Then, sometime after midnight, people naturally woke up. In this quiet, almost sacred interval, they prayed, talked softly, wrote in journals, tended the fire, or simply reflected in silence. After an hour or two, they returned to bed for their second sleep until dawn. This rhythm was natural, shaped by darkness and the absence of artificial light. Only with the arrival of electricity did humans begin compressing their sleep into one long stretch. Heating was perhaps the greatest challenge of medieval life. Without electricity or modern insulation, the cold could be unforgiving. Winters were harsh, and frost crept into homes like a silent intruder. People relied on wool, thick, rough, essential wool, to survive. They layered their clothing, wrapped themselves in cloaks, and slept under heavy bedding. Wool curtains hung in front of doors and windows to block drafts. Some families even brought animals indoors at night, not just for protection, but because their body heat made a difference. The fireplace or hearth was everything. It was placed in the center of the home so heat could spread evenly. Families gathered around it to eat, talk, repair tools, and bond. Children played in its warmth while adults prepared meals. Sometimes the fire never went out, not for weeks or months, because relighting it was difficult and a warm home was priceless. Cooking was slow, patient, and deeply connected to the fire. A pot hung over the flames and food simmered all day, absorbing the smoky flavor of burning wood. Bread baked on stone, meat roasted on spits, and vegetables cooked in iron pots. Every meal carried the scent of smoke. It was part of medieval life, part of the taste of survival. Nighttime routines were simple. Candles were blown out early. People whispered to avoid wasting energy. They rubbed their hands together for warmth, pulled blankets over their shoulders, and listened to the wind moving through the cracks in the walls. Children fell asleep to the sound of wood popping in the fire. Parents stayed awake a little longer, making sure the flames didn't die and predators didn't come too close. Outside, the world felt different than it does now. With no city lights, the night sky blazed with stars. The Milky Way was a glowing river across the heavens. The moonlight painted fields and forests in silver. Owls called out in the distance, wolves howled in the dark, and travelers feared the roads after sunset. The absence of electricity meant the presence of nature, raw, unpredictable, and impossibly vast. This life without electricity shaped people's minds differently. Patience was not a virtue, it was a requirement. Tasks took longer, nights lasted deeper, and life moved slower. People understood the value of warmth, the fragility of light, and the power of darkness. They respected nature because they lived inside it, not apart from it. Every flame mattered, every piece of wood mattered, every hour of sunlight mattered. And yet, despite the discomforts, there was a certain beauty in this simplicity. Families were closer, stories were cherished, silence was meaningful, and life followed a rhythm set by the sun and stars. People knew their neighbors, shared fires, helped rebuild homes damaged by winter storms, and gathered together during festivals to light bonfires that pushed the darkness away, even if just for a night. To live without electricity was to live with awareness. Awareness of time, nature, heat, cold, danger, community, and yourself. It forced humans to adapt, invent, and endure. It shaped medieval culture, architecture, family life, and even belief systems. Fire wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of life itself. Even though today we live surrounded by artificial light, screens, and machines that give us instant comfort, there is something unforgettable about the medieval way of life. Their world teaches us resilience. It reminds us that humanity survived centuries not because of advanced technology, but because of strength, creativity, and the ability to find warmth in the coldest nights with nothing but flame, wool, and hope. The medieval night was more than just the absence of light. It was an entire world with its own rules. When darkness spread across the land, everything changed. People moved differently, spoke differently, even thought differently. The sounds of nature felt louder. The creaking of wooden beams, the distant barking of dogs, the flutter of wings in the rafters, each noise reminded them of how fragile their sense of safety truly was. Without electricity, the line between comfort and fear was razor thin. Inside the home, the fire's glow created a small island of safety. Beyond that island lay only shadows. The corners of rooms vanished into blackness, forcing the imagination to fill the void. Children often believed creatures hid there, watching silently. Parents soothed them with stories, teaching them that bravery meant living with the unknown. But even adults sometimes felt a coldness in their spine when the fire burned too low. Fire tended to crack and spark, sending tiny embers dancing like red insects in the air. The sound of burning wood was a rhythm of medieval life, constant and comforting. People judged time by how quickly a log burned or how loudly it popped. They didn't need clocks. The fire itself kept the rhythm of their evening. When flames dimmed, people knew it was time to sleep. When it roared again, morning routines began. Outside, the silence of villages carried its own kind of weight. With no electric hum, no cars, no street lights, the world was quiet in a way that is hard to imagine today. In that silence, footsteps echoed. A horse's breath could be heard from a distance. Raising your voice at night was unusual, even rude, because sound traveled easily through the cold air. The community respected the night, knowing that every household depended on rest. Yet, the darkness also united people. Villagers often came together for night watches, especially during winters when animals, thieves, or wild predators posed threats. Men and sometimes older boys walked the perimeter of the settlement, carrying torches, keeping an eye on barns, gates, and livestock. The glow of a torch moving through the streets offered reassurance. It meant someone was awake, someone was looking out for danger. Even in darkness, humans created systems of protection. In castles, the night took on a more dramatic personality. Illuminated only by torches and braziers, stone corridors glowed with an eerie orange light. Shadows stretched across the walls like living creatures. Guards paced along battlements, their armor clinking softly, watching for the faintest sign of movement beyond the walls. The world outside was unpredictable. No electricity meant no alarms, no signals, just human eyes, firelight, and instinct. Inside the great hall, fires burned in massive hearths. Heat filled the room, rising to the high wooden beams above. People slept on benches, floors, or near the warmest areas. Nobles sometimes enjoyed the luxury of private chambers, but even those rooms were colder than we imagine. The thick stone absorbed the day's warmth and released it slowly, but not enough. More than once, ice formed on the inside of castle windows. Servants would wake early to scrape frost from the glass, their breath turning white as it hit the chilled air. The medieval world adapted not through technology, but through clever design and tradition. Homes were built with low ceilings to trap heat. Straw mixed with clay insulated walls better than one might think. Reed mats covered floors, keeping cold earth from touching bare feet. Beds were raised from the ground to avoid drafts. Even the positioning of doors and windows was intentional, placed to shield the home from prevailing winds. In wealthier homes, tapestries served more than decorative purpose. These thick woven pieces trapped layers of warm air between the wall and fabric. A tapestry was a medieval version of insulation, a practical defense against winter disguised as art. People valued these items immensely, not only for beauty but for survival. Firewood was a treasure. Families planned for months to gather enough wood before winter arrived. Every piece mattered. Wet wood produced smoke and little heat. Dry wood offered everything: warmth, light, safety. Children helped carry logs. Women split kindling. Men chopped larger trunks with heavy axes. Wood was life, just as electricity is for us today. Because of limited light, people relied much more on memory and senses. They memorized the layout of their homes, paths to the barn, distance between the village and fields. Even in darkness, they could navigate by touch, sound, and instinct. They knew the feel of their wooden tables, the curve of their tools, the placement of every pot and bowl. Without electricity to illuminate mistakes, their minds compensated with extraordinary awareness. And despite the challenges of medieval nights, people found peace in them. The sky above was a spectacle beyond anything modern humans see. With no light pollution, stars glowed like eternal fires. The constellations were clearer, the Milky Way brighter, and shooting stars more frequent. People believed these heavenly signs held messages, omens, warnings, blessings from the divine. The night sky wasn't just beautiful, it was sacred. Many medieval traditions were built around this celestial rhythm. Festivals celebrated solstices, harvests, and moon cycles. Bonfires were lit on hilltops during certain times of the year, casting warm light across the countryside and symbolizing the triumph of human warmth over the long stretch of night. Communities danced, sang, and feasted in these flames, grateful for moments of brightness carved out of darkness. In monasteries, nights were especially unique. Monks lived by strict schedules that included nighttime prayers. They walked cold stone corridors holding small candles or lanterns, chanting hymns that echoed hauntingly through the halls. Their voices were the only sound for miles, rising into the vast silence like a bridge between earth and heaven. Without electricity, devotion felt more profound. Every flicker of light was a reminder of spiritual duty. Every shadow a metaphor for the struggle between knowledge and ignorance. Even the simple act of lighting a fire carried meaning. Fire represented hope, survival, and the fragile connection between humans and nature. People passed down knowledge of how to spark flames using flint, steel, and tinder. Children learned the skill early because losing fire in winter could be deadly. Families used dried moss, straw, or thin bark to catch the first spark. Smoke curled upward, then flame grew gradually until it filled the hearth with warmth. That moment, the return of fire, was a small triumph, something modern life rarely offers. The medieval world without electricity was a world where every action mattered more. Light was not a switch, it was an effort. Warmth was not a thermostat, it was labor. Sleep was not a choice, it was dictated by nature. The challenges were many, but the rhythm of life was deep, grounding, and intimately connected to the earth.